Welcome to Leadership Coaching, the podcast, which builds on conventional wisdom and adds a fresh perspective on this ever-evolving field of coaching. Have we been misunderstanding leadership all along? Traditionally, we ascribe leadership to certain people, but what if leadership lives in relationships instead? If you've been struggling with your identity as a leader, it may be that limitations of an old model just don't fit. Join leadership coach Dr. Martin Kettlehut and results coach and certified IFS practitioner Bill Tierney as we discuss the nuances of leadership as relation. The Leadership Coaching Podcast, awakening the confident and compassionate leader within.
Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Coaching Podcast. Glad to have you with us today. We have a very special guest, along with Bill Tierney, IFS coach and recovery and results coach, along with me, Dr. Martin Kettlehut, author of Leadership as Relation. Today we have with us Marita Bollici. And both Bill and I know Marita from the coaching world, and we've both actually been coached by her. And she runs a program, two programs actually, called Whetstone 1 and Whetstone 2. And just the word itself, take a moment to think of the whetstone as what you sharpen your sword on, right? So it's a very interesting title as well. Welcome, Marita.
Hi.
Welcome, Marita. Glad you joined us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So one of the themes that's been running through a number of our episodes is the difference that it makes when we think of ourselves and our activities and our communications is in relation as opposed to individual, like modes or monads unto themselves. When we start thinking about things in relation, it changes in how we talk about them, and it enriches the conversation, gives us more possibilities for change. And so the topic we'd like to take up today with Marita, since this is what her Whetstone programs are about in to a large extent, is the difference between the way most of coaching that we've known over the past 25 years has been about an individual, right? We coach individuals. And even when we coach groups, we coach the individuals in the group. And so we want to raise a bigger question here today about what has the individual in coaching recognize a larger purpose for themselves, and also how can coaching be responsible for transformation in the larger world, not just one by one with individuals. So that's our theme. Where should we dive in, you guys?
Well, you've already gone through and introduced her according to...
Oh, no, I haven't.
Would you like me to do that?
If you would, that would be very kind of you.
Great. That'll help me to feel engaged, and then I just can't wait to hear from Marita here. So Marita, help me pronounce it. Your last name's different than it was when I was working with you.
Bollici.
Bollici. I would have gotten that wrong. Marita Bollici is transformer, specifically an executive advisor, coach, and coach mentor, whose work encourages a free-thinking, values-oriented approach to personal growth and transformation. Her work is deeply rooted in ontology, buttressed by philosophy and the arts. With over 20 years of experience coaching leaders, executives, entrepreneurs, and individuals, Marita works to fulfill quantitative and qualitative goals with ease and power from within a unique framework. Her ideal client is committed to the improvement of the quality of life for any sector of society and are often themselves change agents and paradigm shifters. Ideal client shorthand: highly articulate spiritual weirdos who are out to change the world.
What does that mean? And how did you get to that?
How did I get to that? I don't recall how I got to that. Maybe someone described me as that. I don't remember. I think that our ideal client is often sort of a mirror of ourselves in some way.
Yeah.
And when I there was a big permission to say it like it is, rather than maybe talk about what an ideal client and sort of like other qualities or characteristics, or like what they do or something like that. I'm like, no, I really want to be working with people who are, first of all, out to change the world. Like that is what we're talking about, and that is what they're there for. And also, it really doesn't have to be all of these things. It could be 2 out of 4. I could do just a highly articulate weirdo or spiritual person out to change the world, or any combination thereof. But the articulation of it really amused me, actually, more than anything else. It really amused me. And I feel like it really captures for me.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that brings it out to change the world. Not every coach says, I want to work with people who are out to change the world. And so it brings up this question of the relationship with this sort of one-on-one thing that we normally do as coaches, and how that. Yeah, so why well, let's maybe start historically. Why is that, and what has us wanting the change now?
Well, for me, I would say that my own evolution. So when I first became a coach, I was trained to work with people on different domains. There's a leading domain, and maybe there's a money domain, or a relationship, or a business. And then out of that, I started over time, I started to become very aware of the ecosystem. Like it's not about different domains. It's about that you live inside of an ecosystem. So every one of these aspects of your life impacts every other aspect of your life. We're coaching from a systemic perspective rather than like sort of siloed a domain.
Right.
So now we're getting into sort of like a relationship to the self as a more holistic organism rather than the disparate aspects of the self.
Okay.
And then after that, I started playing around in what's fun with a concept that I call systemic possibility. And systemic possibility is this idea that what is possible, like when I create a possibility for me, let's say I create a possibility of an outcome. What I don't usually consider in my conception of that is that the fulfillment of that might be fulfilling on a possibility for you. So if I'm standing in the possibility of a highly articulate spiritual weirdo out to change the world, and then Mark hires me as his coach, I'm like, woo, I did my possibility. But Mark's like, oh my God, I was just being to fill out a possibility of a coach. He's like, yada, yada, yada. Right? Who's looking for people to work with who'd want to change the world. A system to actually a system to possibilities. Our perception of possibility is larger than just the subjective relationship to possibility. So now we're like looking at like rating kind of stuff. We're looking at that when I fulfill on what's possible for me, that actually is also fulfilling on what's possible for another. So that's sort of the next evolution in my thinking. And then it turns into, frankly, a boredom with talking to people about their lives in the face of the world, like what's going on in the world, and a curiosity about why no one has ever asked me to support them on a coaching project about their relationship to the climate crisis. I know no one ever asked me to support them around their experience as a citizen. And I just started to get very curious that like all of the same themes were showing up, and how I was putting that in the space, like I just did. Like when you work with a coach, you work on these things. So like I could start to see my own responsibility and how I'm setting that up to be sort of very like looking over here at the self. And then what I noticed from there was that my experiences of coaches was that we're not really prepared to have conversations on this level that we're speaking to today about the self inside of a larger company. Because we ourselves as coaches, while we've done lots of work on ourself and our subjective, or when we start to encounter the world, our resignation starts to show up and possibility starts to shut down. Be able to create something for my own life. But when I think about the world, and the world is way bigger than me, with lots of people with lots of different opinions, most of whom don't agree with me. So it's like, who am I to say, and what is there to create? And so from a whetstone, like that sharpening sword perspective, there was definitely something to be sharpened around our perspective and being able to transform people relative to the world, just transformation relative to the self. And that started the Whetstone 2 process. And that program failed a couple times, or it kind of got to a certain level one time, and then it built there were several years of building because there was something missing in every iteration of the program. It was only really, I think, the fourth iteration of the program, where I had this very generous group who would just let me rip on ideas because we were trying to get it. What is missing? Why are we still unable? What is still in the way? Empowered with the world. And then the year after that was really the first program that I felt covered all of the bases of what needed to be looked at in order to have that conversation.
What was missing?
What was missing was people were still very inside a disempowered context around our identities. And therefore, we needed to have a conversation to talk about our identities where we could do the work to be able to encounter our identity and someone else's, which is kind of the opposite of the coach training that I've ever done, which is all more about your being or your essence. This was actually looking at your personality and your history and how you show up in the world.
So I'm gonna proffer that, Bill, I want to bring you into this because I'm suspecting that, like on the IFS model, we see the individual as having many parts, right? Yeah. That might help us to see then how to cause transformation at a social level, because it's made up of parts too. And so we've got some insight given the background that IFS, gives us. And, so they would be about addressing the parts that are having trouble or in the way or reacting in some way, and tending to them appropriately at a social level, as opposed to the individual and all the parts inside. I don't know. Does that seem like the way or doable? What do you think, Bill?
Well, sure. Marty, you've been around me enough to know that that's the lens through which I'm listening. That's maybe the filter through which I'm listening.
Right.
And so I'm kind of wondering the same thing. And you said it very well, is that, what I've learned about how to help myself and help the individual in the internal family systems model is to recognize that there is a core self that has all the resources needed to lead a life of fulfillment. The challenge is, will the parts step out of the way and allow access to those resources? I'll just say maybe one or two more things about my thoughts about how the application potentially of IFS to the larger scale that we're talking about right now. There's a noticing that goes on in groups of people that are using IFS that recognizes that when one individual is being driven by a part of themselves that's in an extreme role, it activates extreme parts of the other individuals that are in that group. So wars begin.
You can see how I'm interrupting, but you can see how I would be wanting to like Donald Trump is an example, right? He's an extreme individual and he triggers these extremes in us.
Exactly. Whether we're followers or opposers, our parts get triggered.
Yeah.
But it felt equally true that when an individual who can bring some predominant influence in the group is self-led. In other words, they have access to these internal resources that others may be cut off from.
So that might be, I'm interrupting again, I'm very sorry, but that might be something that we should park to come back to, is what's the core self of the community?
There we go.
Okay, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I think that's enough for me. I just wanted to share what's going on as I'm listening, and I appreciate you including me. And I'm just really enjoying listening.
So what are you hearing and this so far, Marita?
Yeah, so there is definitely analogous work in Whetstone 2, the parts therapy. From what I refer to it as, and again, like, and for me, it's all been talked about a million times in a million different ways over millennia. But for me, the analogy we use is our location. So imagine like a two-dimensional infinite plane, and everybody alive today has a unique location on that plane. And your subconcept. So where parts therapy is more like you use a framework to illuminate these aspects of the self. This is where your actual self concept. So like this, there's a two-dimensional plane, and we all have our own location, which is based on our self concept. But really, like how I literally show up in the world. Like for me, mother is probably the first identity piece that I have. Woman would be second, coach would be third. Everybody makes a list. It might be white, it could be liberal or Republican, or it could be unitary universalist, which I am, or whatever it is. Like however you bold yourself in the world, how you would describe yourself. And talk about, we even have clips from movies of people introducing themselves. This is how you introduce your location. Like, what do you do? Where are you from? Are you married or single? Like these are all like different things we learn about people. But we also have a relationship to these things. So for example, if I'm a single mom and I meet a married mom, there might be some wonky relationship there. Or if I'm a single mom and I meet a single person who doesn't have kids, there might be something going on there. Or somebody could like create some sort of weird dynamic in the interpersonal because of the relationship to our own identity.
Okay.
Everyone writes down how they hold themselves. We look at how it evolves over time. Like, 10 years ago, composer was very close to the top of the list for me. Now I don't even think it's in the top 10. So our sense of ourselves is always evolving. And then how we interact with others is always evolving, depending on how we encounter our own space. So like if I make something about me wrong and then I encounter somebody else who activates that aspect, then I will be like, it'll create something wonky. It'll create what I call this a locational dynamic.
A dislocational dynamic?
A locational dynamic. So you have a location. I got my location, you got your location. And our big challenge is, can we like not pick up the rope and create a dynamic? Can we be with other people? They are and as they're not, as we are and as we are not.
Right.
We say in Whetstone 2 that we have a very humble goal. The humble goal is to be able to walk down the street without being a weirdo, depending on who's coming up on the other side of the street. Not being really nice and not like pretending you're talking on your phone, or not like looking the other way, or not saying hi and then they don't say hi, or they say hi and you don't say hi.
Right.
From just based on the split second judgment, right?
Oh, can I just give a quick illustration? I think it's an illustration because I'm Christian. I was raised Christian. I identify as Christian. It might not be that it's not the top, but it's important to me. I mean, on OkCupid, you can say whether your religious affiliation is important to you or not. And it just bothers me to know. And when people on my end of the political spectrum say, "Oh, those damn Christians." Wait a minute, I want to. So, the difference between my identification and my relationship to what it is to be a Christian.
Totally. That's right. So basically, while this is not, there's other spaces that Whetstone 2 goes through. You asked me what was missing. This is what was missing. People were still getting jammed up around stories and contexts about foundational aspects that had never been distinguished.
I see.
When we started looking at the stories, what we found was that they were often like in a coaching context stories, like stories about something. They were often like closed systems, like all roads led back to the same poopy spot. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't an open system. It wasn't a possibility based relationship to these different locations. It was very fixed. And so we started to just like do all the work to distinguish these things and getting air into it so that when you are encountering another person, you relate to them, like you can transcend the dynamics that inevitably emerge,
Yes.
stay more present to you.
Like when an IFS practitioner does that, has you get okay with the community within talking to this part about what's going on with it. I
And
mean,
that's got to be negotiated, Marty. I just want to jump in. So that's got to be negotiated, and I love the direction that you're taking this conversation, that Marita seems to be willing to go in, which is to how do we equate what's happening out there and that transform the world idea, love the world. How do we love the world is the question that you said you'd like to cover here today. How do we love the world? And in the IFS model, when a part shows up in a non-loving way, we get curious about it.
beautiful.
Which is a lot different than what happens, from what I can see, in the external world.
Sure.
Somebody else out there is different than me,
Mhm.
and I don't have my first impulse to get curious about them,
Right.
to understand that difference. I brace myself for conflict. I don't know if that speaks for everybody or the majority, but that certainly is the problem, or something that would block loving the world for me.
Yeah, cancel culture is an example, right? We don't love those people. They're different. Cancel them out.
Yeah, it's funny because so two things. One is, and I view this also related to IFS, is like as we do that work around a location, you heal those parts of yourself so that you can be with another. So you're not gonna let
It's true.
you are not relative to another person. And we talk a lot about how we use other people to like prove something or manage something. Like, can we just leave people alone if a person doesn't know what they're without agreeing to it? So that's really like a loving the self so as to love the world. Um, Another piece is getting that everybody has a unique location and therefore all locations are valid. And we get to a place of like, well, naturally you feel that way given where you're from. Like really just giving up the judgment. Like if I were you, I'd feel the same way too. I probably have the exact same belief system. And like how even two people in the same family don't have the same location because one's the middle child, one's the youngest
Right.
or whatever, right? Like, like really allowing those nuances to inform and like let people be how they are without having to fix or change them. And I love the curiosity piece that you brought up there. And when you talk about that not being the first impulse, I mean, one thing I'm really aware of in Whetstone too, in particular, is that we're all animals. And I don't mean this in a pejorative way. I mean, literally, like we are territorial. We are just like, because that's essentially that first thing that's happening when you meet someone and you're like, what do you do? Who are you? What are you about? You're actually finding out, are you with me? Or are you not with me? Are we the same? Are we of the same tribe? Are we going to get along or are we not going to get along? Right.
It's like the dogs do when they meet in the park.
Right. So sniffing each other's butts, sniffing each other out. And like we do a sniffing out. We keep going down the list. Like that checks. Oops, wait a minute. Maybe this conversation isn't going to last very long. And it's kind of like, and it's a very primal, in my opinion, like it's a very primal response. Like, am I safe here or am I not safe here? And can go all the way from falling in love to genocide. I mean, like it's as close as you can be and it's as far as you can be.
What are examples of transformation at the non-individual level? Like what just so we could like imagine that sort of thing. What are examples of that having happened, or has it never happened before?
I feel like I've read about communities. Like I'm thinking now there was a community like Sierra Leone or like one of those communities in Africa where there was like a genocidal experience, which then healed itself and had a huge reparative conversation. Like I read an article about this years ago and I can't remember which one it was exactly. So I feel like it does happen rarely.
Yeah.
But I don't have it that we're fundamentally in a conversation. Well, most people aren't in a conversation for transformation.
Right.
So then when you talk about a conversation for societal transformation, I'm like, who is leading
Right.
those conversations, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking maybe of what, South Africa
Mhm.
giving up apartheid and becoming more integrated. Now, I haven't been there. I don't know what it's like to live there now, but is that potentially an example?
Well, I guess it depends on what we mean by transformation.
Mhm.
When
Mhm.
you ask the question, what do you mean by transformation?
Well, there's a whole new way of being possible.
Okay. Well, then you could maybe, I mean, we're kind of, you could say that the birth of democracy in the United States was a new way of being.
Right, right.
I mean, civilizations evolve.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and corporate teams too, it's not unheard of that, and I'm working with a team now that is, I hope, on the verge of a transformation where they're on the way because they were talking about each other in spiteful ways, basically, and now they're recognizing that actually is not contributing in the way they want to their bottom line, and that they need to cohere more. They need to communicate better. They need to have those conversations rather than harbor them in themselves. And so they're starting to talk. So I say they're on the way to a transformation. So what about this question of, like, with IFS, there's a self with a capital S to relate the smaller parts to it. Do we need that to transform society? And do we have that? Is there such a thing?
The equivalent of the society with a capital S.
Yes.
I have no idea. I mean,
Is that necessary?
well, I would submit that, and I'm just playing from my perspective, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this. So, for me, transformation begins with a conversation. There's a leadership piece, like who is having the conversation.
Mhm.
Many people have had conversations for transformation and have led that. But the thing that I feel like there's like transformation and then there's transformation. Like there's a transformation from which a person never goes back.
Right.
So in our human lives, we kind of relearn a lot of the same lessons. And then there's a question of like, what is the transformation of humanity such that like we don't need to do some of that stuff anymore? And certainly
Right.
we don't need to do some of that. Like we are, it isn't the way it used to be. Like we are,
True.
in some things, but it's like, what would have some just perspectives be obsolete? We just
Right.
can't do that anymore.
Mhm.
Love that question.
I mean, I always have assumed that had happened. For example, in Space Odyssey 2001, for example, to take, they're living in this, if
Mhm.
satellite, basically. They must, and they're eating differently, and they've got a, and I just always assume, well, they've gone through some sort of transformation.
Mhm. Sci-fi is great for that.
Yeah, right. I'm also curious what you're thinking about this as the real IFS practitioner here. Do you see a parallel? And what would it? How would societal transformation happen? Is it like it would happen with an individual in an IFS coaching context?
I would love to think so. I would love to think that the IFS model could be applied. I love that idea of the society with a capital S, just as there's self with a capital S.
Mm-hmm.
What would be required, and maybe this is similar to nonviolent communication training and facilitation, is a neutral party that can facilitate a conversation between polarized views.
Mm-hmm.
Do it in such a way that's approached with curiosity and compassion, where parties feel safe enough to be able to reveal what's true for them,
Mm-hmm.
and to do so in such a way that their polarized opposites or opposition can hear and then understand something that they didn't understand before.
Mhm.
One of the things that has really been working well that I've developed as I work with my coaching clients using this model is to ask them to ask their parts to play a little game as we learn about the target part, the part that we want to explore and get to know.
Mm-hmm.
The game goes like this. Temporarily, the goal of the game is to learn one new thing that these other parts didn't know about our target part. In the internal family system, there's a constant barrage, practically, for some of us, of internal conflict and war. And in order to get parts to suspend that war long enough for an exploration to take place, they need to agree to do so. And so my efforts to lighten it up for these parts of my clients is a suggestion that we play the game of trying to learn one thing that they don't already know or think that they know about the target part.
Mm-hmm.
And a little pro tip that I offer the parts is that if they will temporarily suspend judgment, then and trade that in for curiosity, that they've got a pretty good chance of winning the game. And we're not competing against each other. We're just competing for ourselves to see if we can learn one new thing. And it's incredible what happens in that space, because now the agenda, the listening, and the presence of the parts that aren't being explored shifts entirely from that, let's just say, wounded, injury based listening, like, how are you going to hurt me now? Or let me find out how you're wrong and let me prove that you're wrong. From that place to conclude everything I've just said, can that same idea be applied to society? But we were to gather opposing forces together and ask them to play a game with us. That game would be, see if you can learn one thing that you didn't know about your enemy.
By the way, I think I'm harking back to an episode many years, not years, but many episodes ago with Leslie Jones, where we talked about the spiral method, which the general point of which is to bring in games so that we can learn more about each other before we, get to the work part. So that resonates there. What are you hearing in what Bill's saying, Marita? Do you, and I'm interested if you find that this curiosity piece arises naturally in the Whetstone context, and if so, why?
Okay, so from what Bill was sharing, I think that the bridge that would need to be crossed would be an enrollment in that pursuit would be worthwhile for both parties. So like when I'm disintegrating, it's easy to enroll me because I don't want to be in that painful space. But when you have two people or two parties, like getting them to like actually bankrupt this sort of way of being where we're unwilling to be curious, right? Very interesting because it's like we don't want to be curious. We don't want to know. We don't want to know what we don't want to humanize.
Right.
It's like it actually will require, and this I feel like is weirdly like there's like a transformation side of it, like Russian dolls or something like that. In the first transformation, human being, like, or willingness to humanize people and our relation with other people. I mean, that already can be such a huge challenge for people. So that's my first piece.
Right. That's great. I mean, we see that in the political conversation now. I'm sorry I keep bringing that up, but it's a great example of people not humanizing each other, but just calling names or making accusations, or there's no curiosity about what is really going on in that human being. That's not going on, and a lot of the time.
And it's so like the snake eating its tail, because the other perspective is so threatening that I don't dare let down my guard to be curious and right? So
Right.
It really requires some wherewithal from within the self and or within the spirit or within your community, but there's some way to be able to put that down to like have that conversation.
Yeah. By the way, just a little plug here. the movie Conclave is about this, I say. It's very well done. And, that it takes that's what happens. I don't want to give away, but at one point, one of the characters has to say, wait a minute, we're demonizing them. Is that what we stand for here? And it changes everything.
Nice. Yeah, truly. So when we talk about how to love the world, so, Whetstone 2, the question of Whetstone 2 is not how to transform the world. The question of Whetstone 2 is how to love the world.
Right.
And from there, it's like the transformation occurs in the self, and the self's ability to get that possibility exists in the world, for the world, right? You open the possibility of possibility in the world. And then
say, what does that mean? Because the average listener would be like, what?
Yeah. So it's like, when we talk about possibility, or transformation, or the true, or self with a capital S, it's like acknowledging our being separate from our stories about our being and whatever we created around those stories, and that we can put down, like that we can encounter the self fully without having to go through the stories or the coping strategies or stuff, and have a relationship with the self directly.
Daily.
So, and then possibility is, from my perspective, I'm writing a newsletter about this right now. So I'm kind of like playing with these very ideas. This is Rita's opinion. Rita's playing with ideas. So then possibility or transformation is what emerges when that being is allowed to create. You're no longer just being, no longer just presence. It's like, okay, what does presence create to experience presence in the world? Because we are going to create things because we're material beings. We're going to make some choices and do some actions.
Right.
And then from presence, it's authentic. It's authentic to presence, and it's of possibility. Presence that we are doesn't have the constraints of the stories that we have.
Right. So, if you don't mind, I'm curious, because we're all musicians, and you even mentioned that was once very high on your list of identifications. Is there an analogy or something worth noticing about the way music gets transformed, right? Because we would say, like, the reason why Bach is still played today is because he transformed music, or Beethoven or Stravinsky. Is there something for us to learn about transformation and about this relationship between the individual and the groups when we look at music, and how it naturally, because it's kind of a natural phenomenon, we could relate to this potentially.
Bill, do you want to talk about this? I'm happy to jump in. I've been talking a lot for a minute, so.
I was just so happy to be included as a musician. I rarely even pick up my guitar anymore, but it used to be my whole life. It used to be my location. I love that use of the word location. Absolutely. I was the guy that played the guitar. That's right. I was. And I used to write songs. I used to perform in coffee shops, and it has been 10 years, at least 10 years, since I have performed a song or even played and sang a full song for myself. It's certainly been at least that long since I've written a song. So, I'm kind of still stuck back there. Am I a musician still? Because it's in my history, and because I have a guitar hanging in my bedroom, does that mean I'm a musician?
So, by the way, this is exactly the kind of thing that we would coach to in Whetstone 2, like that, like dissonance, using musical term, around your location of musician, and like getting that resolved, so that you can, because in that moment when you're thinking, there is this like dissociation from self, because we're like, oh, this, but I'm like, used to be, and yada yada and yada yada. And it's funny how, like, just like these little bits of our identity are so wobbly. Like, it's who we are and who we've been, and yet we're like, I don't know. Am I? What happened?
That's so funny. Yes.
We're meeting other wobbly people on the planet, and we're all like weevils trying to act like not weevils, and we're all And it's very silly, but anyway, not right. That's a great example.
So I want to, speaking of examples, there's two things on my mind. So let me just say, we probably need to start pumping the brakes pretty soon. We got about 9 minutes before I have a hard stop. But secondly, what occurred about 15 minutes ago was I got this thought about something that happened last night. And because I couldn't kind of put together, how does this relate to this conversation? I didn't say anything about it, but I think I'm going to take a little bit of a risk and tell you about it and see what there is to look at within it. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. So it's going to require a little bit of storytelling. Marty, I'm going to need you to help me be as concise as I can. You know how I can go on with my stories.
I'll just do this.
There we go. Okay. So my wife loves gardening. She got involved in a local community farm that is half a mile from her house. Because I love her and she asks me to help her from time to time, I go help her. But I'll tell you what, if it was just me, a single man, not married to a woman that loves farming, I wouldn't go near that farm. I wouldn't shop there. I wouldn't shop in their farm store. I wouldn't help them at all.
Wow.
So over the last 3 or 4 years now, as that farm has been developing, I've gotten more interested. I've actually begun to enjoy my volunteer time there, and I'm a little bit more engaged and invested. So last night, there was, as far as I know, the first gathering of all of the volunteers. And in that experience, it was a 1-hour experience, we were handed a volunteer sheet that had check marks on it for what areas we would be interested in volunteering for. And I had a real internal crisis happening that was so great that it was almost difficult for me to really even listen to what was being presented. Because as I looked at that sheet, what I was sorting out was, do I want to do this or not? Marty, you've heard me talk about, in fact, we had an episode, only do what you want to do. And I ended up marking a couple of things on there. For me, it was I'll help with social media and the website, and I'll work the farm store on Saturdays occasionally. But I mean, I was really holding back. I mean, I wanted to put all kinds of disclaimers on there. So that was going on. I can't speak for my wife and what she experienced, other than I saw that she put a lot of check marks on her volunteer box. So as we're talking about society and transformation and the individual, I kind of think that there's something to say in all of that from that experience last night.
Do you want to share what you see?
Well, part of it is some history is that part of the neighborhood has objected to the farm being there. They thought it would drive values down. So there's been some conflict within the neighborhood around it. And as a consequence, the farm, the builder, it's the home builder that actually is sponsoring the farm and started it and funds it. So Jim was the guy that ran the meeting last night with the volunteers. He's maybe one of those nonviolent communication facilitators. He's a great example of that. He's saying, here's the facts. I want to hear what you have to say. What ideas do you have? And what problems are that we can address? And that's another piece and aspect of this. Over the last 3 or 4 years, this whole dynamic has transformed, probably in large part thanks to him, where they have gone from paying farmers to come do the farm to doing all volunteer now. And that requires that those of us that are in the neighborhood need to step up and say, like me, okay, a little bit. I'll start with just a little bit, where it's going to require probably a whole lot more than just that from more members of the community, like an enrollment. Like, I'm into this. I believe in this.
Yeah. Well, as you're speaking, I'm reminded of a woman that Martin and I knew, and her work we look at in Whetstone too. Her name is Debbie Borza, and her daughter was the youngest passenger on Flight 93. And she created this commitment to world peace. And she used to say, like, a world where, like, all we want is for us to be ourselves and to have our lives work for us. And how do we create a world where everyone is included and no one is left out? Which is kind of interesting because it's like a little tautological, like everyone is included and no one is left out. But it kind of it matters that it's both said. And it's like in that thing, like, how do we include? I remember talking to her about this. Like, she's talking about going swimming with her younger daughter. And she didn't want to, or I don't know, like, there are opinions and preferences and all this stuff. And it actually, like, requires sitting with other people And like, how is everyone included? Where do we agree? Where do we align? Where do we disagree? Where are we going to counter offer? Where do we negotiate? Where can we compromise? Where do we have boundaries? Like actually doing the work of relating and being different from one another, but including all of that in the process, right? Because it's not about an answer. It's just about that everyone is part of the process.
Right.
Everyone's a voice, everyone's preferences is acknowledged, is valuable.
Exactly. Everyone has a choice,
Which is different to me, that it suggests different possibilities than what we were saying earlier, which is that you need some neutral party to be able to sort out the conflicts or, the differences. What if everybody's equal?
Mm-hmm.
There doesn't have to be some, because then you get the question, well, is he really neutral? Like, is he really treating us all the same? Like, so what if, like, for example, the mastermind, right? The concept of a mastermind, there's nobody in charge. Everybody is equal, right, and everybody's voice gets heard. Mm-hmm. Right. And then we, as a group, decide what to do with that. So I think that I just want to throw that into the mix, that maybe it's not even yet in our vocabulary how to talk about these things, because we automatically have, the neutral versus the triggering, and we have the right versus the wrong. And we might need a whole new way to think.
Yeah. And that again is sort of like in that Russian doll, like a pay to play in this is kind of giving up that there's an answer, or that it's going to go life is going to keep happening. Reality is not going to stop. So it's not like that's at risk.
Right.
Like that our version of what it's supposed to look like that's not what the goal is anymore.
Right.
Or the goal.
So I know we need to wrap up, but I want you to be able to tell our listeners, Marita, who I hope will be interested in Whetstone and Whetstone 2 after this conversation, how would they get in touch with you? Where do they meet you in this world?
My name, Marita Bollici, Bollici. There is a website, the whetstoneseminars.com. And you can easily contact anybody through the website. Places you can fill out your name and what you want to talk about and all the jazz.
So it's Whetstone Seminars.
Yeah, the Whetstone Seminars.
Okay, great.
And it's also, my email is marita@thewhetstoneseminars.com.
Very good. Very good. Cool. Great. Any last words? I do want to say that it's really a privilege to have you on, Marita. This question, how do we love the world? It would take a huge heart to even ask that question. And so I thank you for being in the fabric of our world.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure to be with both of you.
It's been great to see you and talk with you again, Marita. Yes. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That concludes another episode of the Leadership Coaching Podcast. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights to fuel your leadership journey. Remember, true leadership is not about you. It's about empowering others. Take your insights to heart and cultivate a mindset that will transform leadership from within your business, organization, or community. Thank you for joining us on this quest to leadership excellence. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, where we explore leadership as relation. Until next time, remember that you have the power to lead with confidence and compassion from the inside out.